noon Eastern time. Great show today coming up. Today, I know. God, it's in the 40s here in LA. We're live as always. My name is Brooks Melchior. Our producer's Camp Smith. And so today we're going to have Phil Perry, who is a Patriot insider up in Boston, NBC Sports Boston. We'll talk Spygate. We'll talk about what's going on with the Pats. It almost sounds the way we get the news about the Patriots, it's like the fall of the Roman Empire, right? The barbarians are at the gate. Tom Brady, what happened, right? Didn't make the Pro Bowl or whatever. Only 3 Patriots, I think, made the Pro Bowl, at least so far, because everybody will back out and they'll end up with like 17 guys on the team because people don't want to play in the Pro Bowl. So we'll talk Patriots with Phil Perry of NBC Sports Boston coming up here in a few minutes. And then we'll speak with Jamel Hill, formerly ESPN, now very busy with her podcast twice a week on Spotify, also a writer for The Atlantic. And later in the show, we'll talk to Tim Brando. And I'm glad we've got Brando on, who, by the way, is a newly minted inductee into the Louisiana Sports Hall of Fame. Congratulations to him on that. Well deserved. He is the mayor of Shreveport, keys to the city. Tim Brando, friend of the show, regular here on Sports by Brooks. And so, but we'll talk to him today about something that you'll probably see or hear if you watch ESPN enough, or you watch pretty much ESPN. They'll be the only ones to mention this. Unless you live in Iowa or maybe Texas. And that's the passing of Hayden Fry, former longtime University of Iowa football coach, and SMU as well. From the Iowa perspective, legendary guy. And I'm not going to run back. We actually have some video. Maybe we'll do it later. We feel like it. But we get the breaking news that he passed away. He was 90 years old. And so he just passed away, Hayden Fry. And so if you're old like me, you remember that when Hayden Fry took over at Iowa many years ago, the Iowa program had been down and out for a long time. A once proud program. Well, that describes every program. Minnesota used to be a perennial national title contender. Minnesota had a good year this year. It's the first time since, they used to be a powerhouse. In fact, if you go back to the beginning of college football, in the 1920s, 1930s, Minnesota was at the top of the rankings every year. And they went to the Rose Bowl and did a lot of great things in the 50s and 60s. So Minnesota is an example. But Iowa has a little bit better reputation than most schools. So when they were down and out, they were really down and out, and the fans were upset. A little bit like Arkansas right now. I think when you look at the predicament Arkansas is in right now and how they've gone a pretty good length of time sucking, and they're not really used to that in Fayetteville, in case you don't know. That's kind of the situation Hayden Fry went into at Iowa. And so Fry had been at SMU, then he went to North Texas, and then he ends up, which was kind of a step down for him. Then he goes to Iowa and turns that program around and was there for a long time. And appropriately, he ends up passing away in the state of Texas, his home state, because he's a Texas guy. But we're going to hear how he's a legend, and the guy had a good record and coached a long time and was a good man. He was a good man. But really, in the end, if you're going to be reading about him in the future, I'm just telling you, after today or this week, if he ever comes up in the future, it will be for one reason. He made an immeasurable contribution to football, to America, in what he did for football and SMU, particularly, in that he recruited the first. Hold on, Cam. Don't play it yet. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Why don't we just set, we should have set that up in advance. You were right to do that. So why don't we do that? Let's tell you, Cam, you're so much smarter than me. Our producer, Cam Smith. Why is Hayden Fry so significant? Well, let's run the film. You were right the whole time, Cam. I screwed this thing up the whole time. So you go and do it because you are correct.
Jerry Levias is taking a beating.
I have a dream. A united party can unite America.
Touchdown, Jerry Levias. Jerry, do you feel your life is in danger?
He was one of the most elusive and creative open field runners in the history of the Southwest Conference.
Jerry could run in a broken field in the same explosive way that Gale Sayers did.
But there was a lot more to Jerry Levias of Southern Methodist University.
He was the Jackie Robinson of the Southwest.
Jerry Levias was a symbol of change in athletics in the Southwest Conference.
He was the first black athlete ever recruited by the SWC, and the experience was painful.
Southwest Conference. SMU.
Guys would hit him with fists and things like that, gang tackling. Sometimes he was slung out of bounds against a wall.
I was at the bottom of the pile, and all of a sudden, all I remember, something came through, and I didn't have a big face mask, and a fist, and they gouged my eyes and knocked my eye back into
Jesus.
The eye socket, and 3 bone zygomatic arch. They crushed those, and I had to have an operation.
We had a ball game.
Here he is, Hayden Fry.
He was tackled.
He was
and
the coach.
The young man
he
from the other
recruited Jerry
team that tackled him not only spit in Jerry's face, but called him a lot of racial remarks.
I came real close to transferring. I had called my cousins. I had called the coaches, and I was ready to go.
But Levias persevered and was ultimately recognized. This is the story of Jerry Levias, a marked man.
There we go. And we got some comic relief on there with
Jerry
the
Levias
subtitles,
is
right?
taking a beating.
Glad they put those on there. But yeah, so Hayden Fry, boy, I butchered this up. Great job, Cam, with the clip. Hayden Fry was the guy who recruited the first black player into the Southwest Conference. And the Southwest Conference schools now are located in the Big 12 and the SEC, right? SMU in neither. They're in the AAC. So some of those schools, Rice ends up out of there too. But Jerry Levias not only was the first black player and endured the abuse, the Jackie Robinson of Southwest college football, but I mean, it's bigger than that. Southern football. And Hayden Fry, of course, was the guy who stepped into the breach, recruited and brought him in. The SMU program was way down, horrible. So Jerry Levias comes in and he turned that program around. The other thing I wanted to point out, this is kind of an AFL, NFL angle that a lot of people don't know, and I want to run this by Tim Brando later on in the show. We'll talk to Tim about Hayden Fry, is that Lamar Hunt, I think this was John McClain, the eminent columnist in Houston, or the Houston Chronicle, told us this. I think Lamar Hunt was the guy who was on the board of trustees at SMU, who gave Hayden Fry the go-ahead to recruit a black player and bring him in. And his freshman year, Jerry Levias at SMU, you could argue he was the MVP of the league, didn't win it, of course, because he was black, and but arguably the greatest year in the history of any player in the South. That's how great he was. He was like Reggie Bush, very similar. Jerry Levias, who went on to play in the NFL with the Oilers. So that's our tribute to Hayden Fry right now. We'll talk about it later, but it is pretty damn interesting. And now we're going to talk some NFL, go out to New England. Good night. We've been out in Boston and New England quite a bit here in the last few weeks. It never seems to end with the Patriots. And we've got Phil Perry with us from NBC Sports Boston. Phil, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Thanks.
Anytime, Brooks. Happy to be on with you. I'm just sitting in the parking lot here at Gillette Stadium, ready to go inside and just face the storm head on yet again.
What is so whatever this, it doesn't have to be Spygate, but what is the storm for you? I mean, what is, or and it doesn't have to be a storm either, but what are you covering right now with the Patriots?
Right now, a lot of it is what we're calling spot. We're trying to get a grip on that in terms of what is this punishment going to be? When are they going to hear about it? What are they expecting here in New England? And just having spoken to people over the course of the last now over a week on this thing, there is very much sort of a resignation that this is out of their hands, at least in terms of the football ops side of it. And they were incensed, I know, when this thing first came down. But now they are sitting here like the rest of us, having not heard from the league in terms of when they might hear on a punishment or what that punishment might be. But we're hearing all sorts of trickle down types of reporting that fine for sure is what seems to be what most people expect, maybe even a draft pick. We can talk about just, the severity of what might be coming down and what might be fair. But here in New England, at least again, from the football ops side of it, they're sitting there sort of shrugging their shoulders like the rest of us and saying, we'll find out when we find out.
It's interesting. We've had some national guys on NFL media and whatnot, and you look on Twitter and you look around the country, and there seems like there's kind of a disconnect because there's a group of people out there saying, okay, this is too much. We've got to have a suspension. We've got to have something in relation to Belichick. Yet then there's another big part of the media where that's not even, in the ballpark. I mean, why do you think that is?
Well, I think when you look at the history, obviously, you would look at it and say, well, how could you not do something serious here if you're the league in terms of punishment? Because the precedent matters, as Roger Goodell said it. And even if he hadn't said it at the podium last week at the owners' meetings, I think we would all assume that because Roger Goodell obviously works for not only Robert Kraft, but the other 31 owners in the league. And I'm sure there are owners around the league that are looking at this and saying, man, we better lower the hammer on these guys because what are they doing? But the other side of it is, do you really feel like something nefarious was going on here, given the nature of the infraction, which the Patriots have admitted they've copped to? To me, what was on that video that Jay Glazer published or posted on Fox the other day is pretty much, and it was a short clip, but pretty much a representation of what the Patriots said it was going to be. It's the sidelines. They're showing substitutions. It's things that the advanced scout would be looking at. Obviously, an incredibly dumb decision to go ahead and tape that thing, especially when you're part of this organization and you know the history here. And that's why football ops was as upset as they were. But I think that's why you have these two different sides. On the one hand, you say, okay, obviously they couldn't be this dumb. They couldn't possibly be trying to cheat, be trying to get some sort of information here that they shouldn't be having because of how this was set up in a press box with a camera in front of Bengals football personnel and team security for both the Browns and the Bengals. And on the other side, you say, well, look at the history. They were obviously trying to do something. So I think that's why you have these two differing sorts of opinions.
And I'll give you an example why that may be too. Dan Orlovsky, the former NFL quarterback, went on ESPN, I think it was yesterday, and we ran this video back yesterday where he was talking about, and it wasn't anything specific, but he was saying, the thing I remember about playing against the Patriots when I was in the NFL is whenever we played them on the road, our coaching staff always told us, don't ever leave your playbook in your hotel room. Bring all of your game materials with you. So the whole team's walking around with backpacks everywhere we went when we would go play the Patriots. And on top of that, that was the one place besides Minnesota. He said Minnesota and New England were the two places where our headsets would invariably go out. And so when you think about the headset part of it, right, then you think about that 2015 article from Van Atta and Wickersham and how they had the alibi. Well, it's a team video that we're shooting. It has nothing to do with football. Right. That was the alibi, right? Then you factor in the Orlovsky. Well, our headsets would invariably go out, once a game, something like that. And now we're looking at the sideline of the Bengals. Does it make a little more sense?
Again, there's obviously that history there, and they open themselves up to that with Spygate, which they've copped to, and which Bill Belichick still, I think, would reluctantly apologize for. It was funny. We sort of retraced those steps during Deflategate and during that famous Mona Lisa Vito press conference that he had here on a Saturday afternoon.
Right.
He said, listen, we were taping signals in front of 80,000 people. The guy is sitting there in front of 80,000 people. We shouldn't have done it, and we were punished for that. But it was essentially, or he also mentioned at the time, and there were a lot of other teams doing the same thing, by the way. So
Right.
You're not getting much of an apology in terms of what their history is and what they have been convicted of doing in the past. The radio sets and you'll get from here, you get a lot of people who say, well, and this is true, the league handles the audio, and that's on them. If there's a screw up here at Gillette more so than there is at other places, then talk to the league about that. But they open themselves up to that, Brooks. And so that's why this is so frustrating for the football team, is that this was a totally avoidable, superfluous sort of mistake, and that this was a marketing thing that was being put together in this Do Your Job documentary that they were doing on the Scout. There are a bunch of these. It is sponsored. The team brings in a lot of money for these. And so this is part of the organization. This is an arm of the organization that Bill Belichick would be totally fine with if it was done and gone forever. And he's felt that way probably for a long time. But now this is bringing stuff back on him because of something that he and his staff did 12 years ago. And it's just, it's almost like a bad dream, I think, for them now. How could this possibly happen? You know how this looks. And now we're going to be the ones who have to deal with the punishment here.
Visiting with Phil Perry of NBC Sports Boston. Phil A. Perry, one word on Twitter. So what's the situation with the guy who was filming it? From the reports I've seen, it was his first time ever on the road, the actual cameraman. Now, there's been another person, I don't think, who was the cameraman, who was suspended, who was overseeing it, the situation as it happened. So what is that whole scenario? How's that playing out?
So the part of the staff that was there was the videographer who was running the camera, and the producer, Dave Mondillo, who actually released a statement on Sunday. This is a guy who
went to the bathroom. I went to the bathroom and came back.
To the bathroom. Yeah. You just feel like with some of these statements, Brooks, that, some of the details are things that they might want to leave alone. And it might be something that the Patriots would want to leave alone too.
Right.
And, he's been suspended. Would I expect that he's back? I think that would depend on what the punishment is that comes down from the league. But I would say right now, at least in terms of how it looks, with that guy Mondillo releasing a statement on his own, the team did not know that was coming out. I can tell you that for a fact. Football Ops was surprised to see that statement released by a local PR affiliate or a PR agency here. And so for that to happen would suggest to me that he is not going to be an employee who is back here at One Patriot Place anytime soon. But that was the situation where you had a videographer, you had the producer who set up the shot and was overseeing the shot. And then, as he described, he left and came back. And that was when stuff hit the fan. Yeah. And it's unbelievable. And again, for somebody who's been here as long as he's been, almost as long as Tom Brady, Dave Mondillo had been with the Patriots for 18 years. And so for him to not understand Deflategate and what that involved and what the rules would be with a video camera, again, it's just the nature of the infraction to have that piece of equipment and doing something you're not supposed to be doing with that piece of equipment. It's unfathomable. Yeah,
I think the guy who was overseeing is culpable, because why are you set up there in the first place in that situation? Even if the videographer doesn't have any experience, the guy wearing the Bruin, I think that's the guy who was wearing the Bruin Danny Moog jersey, right?
It sounds like an SNL skit, doesn't it?
Right, it does, totally.
You've got, Fitzy with the Bruins sweater on, he's taking the shot where he can get it and saying, "What, me? What do you mean I can't shoot the sidelines?"
It's unbelievable. So indulge me on one more thing on Spygate. We had the great Greg Bedard on our show last week, a friend of the show, great guy, not shy about his opinions. And we talked about the situation with the Patriots and the filming of the Bengals. And he mentioned the name Ernie Adams, a guy that apparently, and Greg didn't characterize it this way, but reminded me a little bit of it sounds like a little bit like the Harvey Keitel character in Pulp Fiction, Winston Wolfe, the fixer guy, right? Ernie Adams. That's me talking. But have you heard that name, Ernie Adams? Could he be a factor in this at all, you think?
Well, he was a factor with Spygate, the original Spygate,
right?
And was the one who would sort of organize the information according to that 2015 report from ESPN. And as a guy who has a long-term relationship going all the way back to high school with Bill Belichick, was a huge fan of Bill Belichick's dad's book on football scouting, and that's how the two met. He approached Bill and said, "Is Steve Belichick your dad?"
Nerd
Very
Central.
known book, huge book in the football community. But Ernie Adams, as a high schooler, seeks out his son, and they just so happen to be in the same class at a prep school here in New England, and it just starts this lifelong friendship. But Ernie Adams is somebody with a photographic memory by all accounts. There are many of us who have covered the team for a long time who don't know a ton about the daily ins and outs of Ernie Adams' job. It's a lot of projects from Bill Belichick, a lot of projects that he comes up with on his own. He is a part of the Team Hall of Fame committee, so we get to meet with him once a year as we're determining who goes up for a vote for the Patriots Hall of Fame. And it's fascinating to listen to this guy. He is a football encyclopedia, genuinely, and just the memory is remarkable. And so, would he have been involved in this in any way? Again, from everyone I've spoken to, this was a genuine, boneheaded for sure, but genuine mistake on the part of a marketing arm of the team, essentially, and content arm of the team. And so for Ernie Adams to get brought into this, again, I just feel like if he had anything to do with it, Brooks, they would have been a lot smarter about how they were going to try to pick up their information. They wouldn't have set up a camera in the press box.
So it sounds like from, and I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm not putting words in the New England media's mouth at all. But that tape that we saw changes nothing in terms of punishment and what may happen. We already knew what was going to happen. So that tape, from the perspective of the New England people, I don't know, that really doesn't matter. We already knew that. And so the punishment is going to be what it was going to be anyway.
Well, I can tell you from people I've spoken to around the league, it did change things.
Oh, okay.
And so if it changes things for owners around the league, I think that's what'll matter. If I talk to football people, whether it's front office people, personnel people, coaches, and I get back, hell yeah, we would have been pissed if that had been us and not the Cincinnati Bengals. And hell yeah, I would want them to be punished and be punished severely. If they are echoing sentiments of their ownership around the league, then that's going to be a factor for the Patriots. Me personally, as an individual, again, talking from the people I had spoken to, again, these are New England people, and they are telling me what's on the tape. And then I see the tape.
It was on the tape.
Not a whole lot got changed there.
Right.
But when you have that image, that video, those pictures associated with whatever it is that's already come out, whether it's reporting or a statement from the team, that can still change things for people. Just having that and being able to actually see it instead of trying to picture it in your mind's eye, I think that could change things for people. So if there were owners who, before this tape came out, said, what really could they have garnered from this? And then they see the tape and they say, well, wait a second. These are players going in and out, personnel groupings. There might be signals here. This doesn't look right to me. Even if it had been described to them that way before they saw it, just the act of seeing it, Brooks, I think could actually change some things.
Visiting with Phil Perry, NBC Sports Boston. Last thing for you, we'll let you go, and really appreciate your time coming in on what's a very, very crazy, busy week. This game coming up against the Bills, who would have imagined that the game would carry with it the import that it does? What's your thought on that? And also, I'm cheating here because it's two questions. What about Tom Brady? Will he be back next year for the Patriots?
So let's start with the second question first. If I had to guess, I would say Brady's not back next year, and I would say he's playing somewhere else in 2020. I feel like right now, for me, and again, from people I've spoken to, there is no doubt in my mind that he wants to continue to play. I also feel like the Patriots started on a path before this season when they signed Brady to the quote-unquote extension that they did, that they showed their cards in terms of what they were hoping for the future. If they wanted Tom Brady to be here long-term, they had an opportunity to sign him to a long-term deal. And he was very open in wanting that kind of deal.
Right.
They didn't give him that kind of deal. And so I think from Brady's perspective, you say, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to try to prove you wrong again. And if he comes out and he has an MVP caliber season, then there's a much better chance that he's back. But right now, the way it looks, and it doesn't look to me like this offense is necessarily going to get much better next year, Brooks, I would say it's very unlikely, at least right now.
I mean, isn't it, Phil? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is just unbelievable to me based on what other people do in pro sports. The guy has the rings. He's the GOAT. Everybody universally acknowledges, and he's playing for a contract. And the perception is out there that he's kind of taken it for the team for many, many years. And maybe Belichick was part of that, signed off on it. And now here we are. And look, his skill level, it looks like, I mean, he's an old guy, but you would think maybe he gets the benefit of the doubt. It just sounds like that ain't going to happen.
I really don't think it is. And from the team's perspective, Brooks, it does make sense to me. This is what makes this situation so fascinating, is that nobody's wrong here. Yeah. I think Tom Brady should want to play as long as he can play. He's a maniac. He wants to compete. He loves the game. And so why tell him he should retire a Patriot just because it sounds nice and because that's the fairy tale ending to the story? It shouldn't have to be that way if you're Tom Brady. And coming into this year, he was still one of the best quarterbacks in football. There was really no argument against that. But at the same time, if you're Robert Kraft, you're a good businessman for a reason. If you're Bill Belichick, you're a good personnel man for a reason. It doesn't make a ton of sense for you to invest in terms of years and money in a 42 going into his 43-year-old season quarterback. And so it makes sense on both ends. And that's why I think there is some resignation as far as on Brady's end saying, okay, they don't want me here because if they did, they could have signed me. And on the Patriots end saying, okay, it's time for us to start fresh because how much longer can we bank on Tom? And look at how the offense looks right now. We need a reset here. And so just, again, from speaking to people, I spoke to someone recently who knows Tom Brady very well and said, enjoy it while it lasts. And he wasn't saying his career, period, end of story.
Amazing.
He was saying enjoy it here while it lasts because that's just how it feels right now.
Well, is it the personnel or is it Brady on offense? What's the issue with the lack of production?
It's funny because if you had asked me a week ago, I would have said 100% the personnel, because just a few weeks ago in a game against the Cowboys here in New England, wind whipping, rain, cold, I thought that was honestly one of Brady's best games the last couple of months. If you look at some of the individual throws, just the accuracy, the strength, the velocity on some of those footballs, and they were being dropped or receivers didn't know where they were supposed to go or he wasn't getting protection. Again, against Kansas City, I said, perfect example of how he doesn't have enough around him, can't get protection, has no time. The receivers don't know what they're doing. And then this past week, after taking a shot to an elbow that he's been dealing with injury in that elbow, that right throwing elbow for the last more than a month now, he takes a shot against Kansas City and then he comes out and he has, I would say, one of his worst games of the season. I would stack it right up there with that Bills game back in week 4 based on the inaccuracy. He had time to throw in Cincinnati. He was just missing throws. And we haven't seen that all that much from Brady this year. There have been plenty of instances where you could look at the receivers and say, well, he ran the wrong route or he didn't get the signal at the line of scrimmage. Here it was good pocket, time to throw, receivers open, Brady misses them. And so that has been a little bit of a change. And that's why I think the elbow is a real problem right now.
And so on the bottom line with the Bills, was the first Bills game, the real Bills, the real Patriots, or is it going to be different this time?
That was the real deal. And that's scary if you're the Patriots, because offensively, how many points did they actually score that game? They won that game because they blocked a punt and returned it for a touchdown, which has been the story of their season. In all honesty, they've needed whether short fields or outright scores from the special teams unit or the defense to be in these games and to win some of these games against better teams. The Bills are going to be one of the best defenses they face this year. They always give Tom Brady a problem, even when they're not having great seasons. And this year they're having a great season, and they are universally considered a great defense. So they're going to give them a hell of a time. Talking to somebody in the front office here, as Josh Allen was trying to throw away that game 2 weeks ago, before Josh Allen went on the road with the Bills and beat the Steelers, and this executive telling me, these guys are going to give us a problem in a couple of weeks here. And since then, all we've seen is the Patriots offense totally nosedive, and the Bills go on the road and beat a potential playoff team in the Steelers. So this is going to be a close game. It would not shock me if the Bills come in here and win it. And it seems like, and it looks like almost a passing of the torch a little bit here, Brooks. I think you got to brace for that if you're a Patriots fan.
You know what it is? This is like Shakespearean. This is the closest thing you get to Shakespeare, what we have with Brady, what's going on I mean, there's so many things going on, and I can't thank you enough. And be sure and say hello to our guy, Tom Curran, please. You guys do a
I
great
will.
job. I'm on your site every single day. Great job with your coverage at NBC Sports Boston.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Brooks. And I will definitely, I will tell Tom you said hello. We are still talking to each other. We spend an inordinate amount of time with each other every single day during Patriot season. So it gets towards the end of the year, and you might hear us sort of drop the gloves, so to speak, in our little office here at Gillette Stadium. But right now things are good. Things are good. We are on speaking terms, so I'll say hi to him for you.
You guys are the Delphi of Patriot stuff. You guys are the oracles. You literally are. I mean, that's where I go. So thanks.
Well, I appreciate that. We appreciate that for sure, Brooks. Thanks again, man.
That's Phil Perry of NBC Sports Boston. Nice enough to stop by. I mean, this is the craziest week of the year. The Spygate stuff's coming to a head. You've got this. This is the game to me of the week, the Bills and the Patriots, because of that injection of the Spygate thing, the Brady drama, which to me, both of those stories are the two most underplayed stories of the week, and you could argue of the year. I mean, I'm watching ESPN. I'm listening to shows, and I'm thinking to myself, this is why we're doing this show, because nobody's talking about Brady leaving. Not really. That's kind of a big deal. I mean, we've talked to, how many people have we talked to in New England over the past, couple of months when it really started to pick up steam that Brady wasn't going to come back, or the rumors about it? I can remember, we started reporting the story about this, put his house on the market, and then Guerrero did, but then he sold his house or whatever it was, right? The Netflix thing, all these things flying around. And so over the past 2-3 months, I mean, we've had like 10 people on who are all on the ground in New England. They're all saying the same thing, right? And so that is, I mean, if playing for one team matters, if everything they tell us about with football matters, the legends, it's a little bit like the Hayden Fry thing. I was looking at videos because I wanted to show you guys something about him. And the whole time I'm looking at videos about Hayden Fry, a legendary figure in, well, yeah, kind of, I guess, if you live in Iowa, sort of. But I mean, to me, he's a legend because of what I told you. But that story is completely underplayed, not even mentioned. So this is typical. That's why we're doing, honest to God, that's why we're doing this show. I'm able to come on and we can talk about the stories that you're wondering about. Wait a minute, Brady's leaving? Huh. Why aren't we talking more about that? Why are we doing all these other things? Now, of course, talking about how he's playing, the personnel with the Patriots. To me, a great question. God knows we've gone down this road with Tom Curran, many, many others, Zach Cox, and a lot of people up there in the media. By the way, we need to check in with Chris Gasper and Tom Keegan, a couple of Boston print and radio guys, to get some updates in their perspective, because we're just trying to find out whatever we can find out on this show. But when it comes to Brady's abilities right now, that's a big question. And is it the personnel? Is it his ability? Is it an injury? Can the injury get better? To be quite honest, it doesn't sound like it sounds like Bill Belichick's made up his mind. It really does. So that's huge. And so when you look at this, the change, I mean, the passing of the torch, the changing of the guard, if we, after 7 or 8 weeks of the season, if people said that to you, I mean, that's how recent this is. And you look at the Patriots record. What? Look at the record. Same old story. They're always a great, to me, you could make the argument that this is one of the best performances by Brady in his career for the season, keeping the thing together. Look at their record. Look at that. I mean, that offense is terrible. They have nobody. On offense. It's like force of will somehow, some way. I know the defense is very, very good. I will say this, though, and this is what popped into my mind with Phil Perry. when Phil mentioned, well, you know, the takeaways have been a key to the Patriots season, I thought to myself, uh-oh, that's the kiss of death. Because takeaways, just so you know, you probably recognize this in case you don't. Takeaways, that is a binary statistic that you cannot count on year to year in any way. If you look at the statistics of takeaways, all that stuff over the years, right? Giveaways of football teams that are relying on that one season very rarely have the same thing happen. It's not like because you have a great defense, you're going to have a lot of takeaways or special teams. There's some very rare examples, but 99 times out of 100, like the Bears last year, you know, the Bears had a good defense last year. They got a good defense this year. What's the difference? No takeaways this year. They still have talent on defense. Not that different, but no takeaways because you can't count on takeaways. That's kind of a non sequitur, if there is such a thing as a non sequitur statistic. So when you start hearing that and your season starts to depend, you're screwed. It's over. It's over. So, but this is the moment, folks. How many times have we buried Tom Brady? We have over the years. And they come back from out of nowhere and he's a different guy or something happens, right? The other thing I wanted to, and I can only ask Phil those sorts of questions so many times, is I don't know about you. But I hear media people, fans, whomever, and they have just accepted the Patriots version of events that from that, the Patriots have been extremely effective in how they've handled it, I think, by putting out the statement, acknowledging whatever they felt they needed to acknowledge, whatever their knowledge of it was, right? Getting it out there. So by the time we see the tape, well, they already said that was on the tape. They already kind of set it up for us, right? Right. First of all, so what? It just confirms what we already knew, that you're repeat offenders. But the whole idea that because they acknowledged the issue and they apologized and said they were in the wrong and all that stuff, that should mitigate the situation. And because of that, the implication is, well, there's no way the football guys knew it. What? No way. No way. Dude, this is, I'm telling you, this Netflix thing, it's the same thing. And maybe Brady didn't see that clip. Maybe the people who work for him were supposed to screen the clip, the Netflix clip, right? Maybe. And that's why we had that disconnect. But that said, even after that, when Brady sees the clip, the Netflix craft thing in front of the strip mall with the rub and tug, and then Brady tells us, no, it's not intended to be a statement about the owner. I mean, what are the odds that he is in a film that comes out in the middle of the year or a Netflix show, and that's the one scene? What? And we just accept it. Well, then, and he blames the media. We go along with it, right? We just go along with it. We just go along with, I believe Bill. I believe him, even though, we've been lied to for a decade and misrepresented to for a decade. And you've got this guy, Winston Wolfe over here, Ernie Adams, still there, right? It's just one of those situations where the Patriot, this is the funniest part of it. When you hear the Patriots are livid about it. What happened? They're livid. They're upset. Look, they may be upset. They may not. The football side, Belichick. And when you say football side, the only name that matters, and this is because this is the way Bill Belichick wants it. He's the guy. There's this veil of secrecy over the organization, always has been. There are no individuals. Tom Brady's finding that out the hard way now. But there are no individuals in that organization, and that's by design. And I'm not saying it. Listen, Bill Belichick is a genius. This is not to imply that he's, his Super Bowl rings are due to cheating. I don't think they are. But the whole situation that he has set up, right, coming in to this situation is the reason you cannot believe him. It's impossible, right? He has set up an organization that did all of this extensive, systematic, documented cheating, period, repeatedly, right? And for all we know, listen, he may not have known about 90% of it, 95% of it. It might have been Ernie Adams or other people. But what's the difference between that and not knowing about this, right? And for all I know, listen, that was innocent. The videographer was his first time on the road. That could be the case. The guy went to the bathroom, Dave Mandillo, who they've suspended, which is absurd. As Phil informed us, the guy over in, the media part, the Kraft Productions guy. I mean, the Kraft Productions company, right? In the 2015 article, Van Atta and Wickersham reported that videographers were schooled to say, if they were caught filming other teams' sidelines, to say they were with Kraft Productions and that they were doing this team feature. It had nothing to do with football. That was back in 2006, 2007, and it was reported in 2015 and documented in manic detail. And we have the same thing now, right? And we're just, wow, the Patriots are livid. How absurd is that? It's absurd. So the bottom line here is, it's not even the Patriots, it's the NFL. And Phil made a very good point. Phil Perry from NBC Sports Boston just joined us here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. I'm Brooks Melchior, our producer Cam Smith. Coming up, we'll talk to Tim Brando. We'll talk some college football with him. Lots to talk about there. It's signing day today. Tomorrow, we're going to have a lot of coverage, not boring, stupid coverage of signing day, but just give you an idea what's going on, what's really going on in college football. And in fact, I want to show you something here in a minute. We might run that Tom Herman clip. I think we have it, right? Of what's already happened today in college football on signing day. But in talking to Phil Perry about the situation, he gave us a lot of different things that I didn't know about coming in. And the fact that the guy from Kraft Productions has been with the organization almost 20 years, that's unbelievable that could happen. But the other thing is that Phil brought up that made me, reset the whole perspective on it is other teams, other owners, why that film was so important, critical. And now Roger Goodell's on the clock. It's his neck because so many owners know about this, right? So great job by Phil Perry. We've got NBC Sports Boston covered. We have Tom Curran on, and we'll have him on again soon. And we're going to talk NFL throughout the week. You can guarantee. But today is one of the two signing days in college football, right? And one of the more intriguing situations right now is at the University of Texas. Tom Herman, the coach we showed you a while back, he's been headbutting players without a helmet on, the coach of Texas, Tom Herman. And so it's Texas. They're going to underachieve. You know that. How long has it been since they had a great team? 2006, right? Rose Bowl, Vince Young. It's been that long. So now they've got this coach, Tom Herman, who's a mess. How big of a mess? So Longhorn Network, ESPN's network that nobody gets and nobody watches, Longhorn Network, which is the reason that A&M ended up going to SEC country and blew up the Big 12 and screwed the Big 12. Longhorn Network, right? They're broadcasting University of Texas's signing day today. So you've got the coach of Texas football, Tom Herman. And so they have their studio set up, which you're going to see in a second because we have a video of it. There's a reason I'm telling you about it. You got Emmanuel Ocho there on set from ESPN. You see him on Get Up once in a while. Famous Texas people. So they're on set and they're breaking down all the recruiting signees of Texas. And then they have like this kind of security camera looking thing that is showing you the University of Texas football war room. You know, it's like the draft, which that's really what this is. And there's Tom Herman and his recruiting coordinator at this big conference table as part of this security looking footage that you would see as you're walking out of 7-Eleven. And it's showing them and what their responses are, what they're doing. And as other coaches around the country are trying to flip recruits from one school to theirs, Tom Herman, the coach of Texas, he was doing some flipping too, but it was different though from those other coaches, his flipping. So watch this video very closely. Herman's at the top of the screen in the white hat. We'll show this a couple of times. And there's the recruiting coordinator in the blue. So watch Herman. That's Tom Herman, the coach of the University of Texas, flipping off the camera. And this is his recruiting coordinator doing the same. Yeah. Okay. There you go. That's Longhorn Network. Wow. Any response to that? Yeah, I know I got his name wrong, by the way. Cam, that's why you're on the show, because you're always ahead of me. And I appreciate it. But what's your response, Cam? Cam Smith, our producer, Texas guy, to what you saw in that situation with Tom Herman. Any thoughts off the top of your head? Because you're a college football guy, high school recruiting guy. Cam Smith, our producer. Okay, cool. Hook 'em. Yeah, hook 'em. Yeah, exactly. That was the response from Tom Herman, the coach of Texas, who was the boy genius, offensive guru savant, photographic memory for Ohio State under Urban Meyer. That's how he ends up at Texas, right? That guy. I can't understand why there aren't any African-American head coaches in college football. There aren't. But when all of this controversy happened with Zach Smith and Ohio State and Urban Meyer, Zach Smith was buddies with Tom Herman. They used to party together, obviously go to strip clubs. And so Zach Smith, this former Ohio State assistant coach who really kicked off the beginning of the end for Urban Meyer with the alleged spousal abuse. He was the coach involved at Ohio State. Well, he's buddies with Tom Herman, who's at Texas now, and he's tweeting at Tom Herman about all the things that Tom Herman did with him, all the stuff he shouldn't have been doing, apparently. And at the end of this stream of tweets from the disgraced Ohio State assistant coach on Twitter, Herman, as Cam Smith pointed out a second ago, Herman tweeted back to Zach Smith out in public, okay, cool, hook 'em. I'm at Texas, you're screwed. I may have done a lot of stupid bad things, but I didn't do what you did, Zach. So doesn't look good for Texas football. We talked to Clarence Hill Jr. of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the dean of Cowboys beat reporters, also a guy that follows the Texas program very closely. Yesterday, he was almost eulogizing the Texas program. And if you think about it, we talked to Jordy Galata and many others, Peter Burns of ESPN, which, by the way, Peter Burns will be joining us later on in this week. He'll be one of our cavalcade of college football media stars tomorrow to talk about kind of the aftermath, the dust clearing from signing day. But the story, and it's not a story, it happened. LSU was this close to bringing in Tom Herman as their head coach, but Herman blew them off and went to Texas and got more money. And for that reason, Ed Orgeron got the job. And so, when you look at the situation in Texas right now, they've got a good recruiting class coming in, but Jesus, that means, to be honest with you, that really means less than nothing. Because how many times do we hear that with Mac Brown? How many times have we heard that over the years with other programs? Well, I'm not saying that it's not important to follow it, recruiting. It's overrated. Ask Kansas State football fans how important recruiting classes are. Ask Washington State fans how important recruiting classes are. If you've got a coach who can actually coach during a game, improve the skills of his players, develop his players, right? Instead, what college football is, because those are outliers. Bill Snyder at Kansas State, Mike Leach. By the way, ESPN just came out with their all-time top 150 coaches. We should probably do a little thing on this. I think we have. Maybe we haven't, because I've been tweeting about this. Top 150 all-time college football coaches. And Mike Leach was not in the top 150. And Bill Snyder's like number 55. Bill Snyder's coaching job at Kansas State, he recently retired. It's like one of the most remarkable college coaching jobs in history. You have to have grown up in that area as I did, and to see how bad this Kansas State program was. It's like a high school team for 70 years. And he came in and turned them not only into a good program, but he turned them into a perennial top 5 team for almost a decade, Kansas State. And now they've got a new stadium, not a new stadium, but they got a nice stadium. They got facilities. They're a legit program. And they just made a great hire in Chris Kleiman, who was the guy they should have hired in the first place. So, and Cam, our producer, makes a good point, and which is funny. Chris, and it was actually Clarence who made this point yesterday as well. Tom Herman, right? So he's under fire. He's under fire. What are they, 6-6? And they should have lost to Kansas. Somehow Kansas lost that game. And I think there was one other game that Texas should have lost, right? So they could easily be under 500 right now. Not that it really matters at this point. But so what does Tom Herman do when he's going to hire a defensive coordinator? He hires his old buddy from Ohio State, Chris Ash, who went to Rutgers. And you talk about a bad job, a job that you could have done a better job. You could have done a better job coaching Rutgers than Chris Ash, right? I was reading some of the reportage coming out of NJ.com about Schiano and Rutgers and Ash, who had been fired at Rutgers. And the reporter had actually gone around to different prominent high schools in the state of New Jersey. And all of these high school coaches, over a period of about 3-4 years that Ash was there as the head coach of Rutgers, had never seen him, had never talked to him. So that's an example. Bill McCartney is another example of Colorado, guy that turned a program around. But I mean, you could say the same thing about Gary Barnett at Northwestern. So there's a few. I think the difference with Snyder and Leach is they've sustained it. And believe me, I'm not a fan of Mike Leach at all. But facts are facts. What he did at Washington State, forget about the facilities. He could do that with no facilities. He was at Texas Tech, one of the worst jobs ever, right? Texas Tech, Lubbock. You're recruiting against all of these other big schools. So the key to me is not so much the stars that you're getting in that recruiting class, because people say, well, you got 5-star this, 5-star that. That's a big point people make about Ohio State and Michigan, right? That's overrated. As long as you have a representative class, right? But you've got to have a coaching staff that develops players, and it has to start from the top. And for better or for worse, Mike Leach's methods, they're unorthodox, right? In how he gets done what he gets done. And there's weaknesses to it. Look at their situation when they play Washington. Defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake has beaten them, 7 times in a row, shut down the Washington State offense. 7 times in a row. Jimmy Lake's now the head coach at Washington. So there are holes. I don't think Washington State or Leach is a guy who's going to turn a program into a CFP bound program like a Dabo Swinney or a Nick Saban necessarily. But he's a great coach and he belongs in the top 150. And the fact that he's not in the top 150 tells you how the media approaches the sport, what their priority is. Their priority is covering programs that have all the talent, overwhelming talent, and that win every year because of it. And it's a cyclical thing that's perpetuated by the media. So the more publicity Nick Saban gets, right, the easier it is for him to recruit. I'm not saying Nick Saban doesn't work his ass off. I'm not saying Nick Saban doesn't do a good, he does. And to sustain that, it's remarkable what he's done. But so when ESPN leaves Mike Leach out of the top 150, has Bill Snyder all the way down there. I don't know if McCartney was in there. I don't know where they had Bill McCartney. He belongs in there, even though the Colorado program's kind of fallen off here and there, up and down. It just, you've got to remember that when you're watching cover, if it matters to you, right? And when you hear about, like right now, what's going on at SC, to be quite honest with SC, I'm not as caught up with the situation as everybody else is. It's understandable that people are upset, especially people that cover SC recruiting and cover the Pac-12, and they're upset about Helton. That is understandable. But what was Keaton Slovis, right? What was Joe Burrow? A transfer, third stringer. What was Justin Fields? He wasn't even on the Georgia roster, even though it was a highly touted recruit. I mean, you had a 5-star guy in Justin Fields. What was he? The number 1 ranked player in the country as a high school recruit, goes to Georgia, can't get on the field, transfers, right? So you got to take that stuff and forget about it once you get your guys in. And so I think the issue with Clay Helton is, and remember, if you're an SC fan, you know this, right? When it comes to quarterback, particularly, but in judgment of talent, Helton has shown he can't do it. We're going to talk to, hopefully, we're going to have Petros Papadakis on this week, who is the best USC analyst in the country in terms of telling you what's going on. Former captain. So we're going to be visiting with Tim Brando coming up here in a few minutes, and then we'll talk to Jamel Hill in a bit here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. We just share with you our thoughts on Hayden Fry. And I want to take a look at a couple of things really quick. Do we have any time? We've got Tim Brando coming up. Can we do one thing? Can we run that the clip with Mark Emmert? Cam Smith, our producer, do we have time to do that? Where you could see what Mark Emmert said yesterday, NCAA president. Was actually, somebody made a statement to Mark Emmert at this conference in Aspen yesterday saying that the NCAA, the public had lost confidence in the NCAA. And we were able to find a video clip of Emmert in that exchange, what his response was when somebody said, "Oh, the public has no confidence in your organization, President Emmert." This happened yesterday in Aspen during a conference. And so we were able to hold the video.
Confidence in the NCAA is kind of low at this point. I mean, you
better than journalism. Just saying.
Ooh, low blow. It's safe to say, I mean, public confidence in the NCAA is kind of low at this point. I mean, you
better than journalism. Just saying.
There you have it.
Ooh, low blow.
That explains everything. Mark Emmert has said a lot of things, and I've covered him for a long time, decades, right? I think that's the first time I've agreed with something that he said. Right. In no way is that an endorsement of the NCAA. In no way. But we really are at a low ebb when it comes to journalism, when it pertains to college football. He may have been talking about journalism in some other area, but right now, I think we are at a low ebb when it comes to journalism in college football. That's not a criticism of any individual writer, but there's just a different level of accountability or lack thereof. And I think it actually starts with, ESPN and Fox, the two big players. Why do I say that? Where are the college football insiders? Where's the breaking news when it comes to ESPN and Fox? Where are they? I mean, Bruce Feldman does a great job. He does. He's a Fox guy. He does sidelines on Fox broadcasts. Occasionally he'll be in studio for Fox shows, but Bruce Feldman should be in the studio as an insider like a Jay Glazer, in my opinion, on Fox. He's one of the best in the business breaking news, if not the best. Why would Fox not have him there? What's the difference between the NFL and college football when it comes to having an insider breaking news, right? They've got Jay Glazer there, to Fox's credit, but not in college. College football to ESPN is actually more important than the NFL. They make more money off college football. College football is the flagship play-by-play property for ESPN. And it's all fluff. Now, I'm not saying there aren't serious analysts who are breaking down college football playoffs and analyzing things. And I think Kirk Herbstreit's one of the best analysts. Actually, Herbie might be the best analyst during games. And, you know, he's not afraid to step on toes. So from a on-field perspective and a purely football perspective. But when it comes to all of the things that we know go on, right, behind the scenes, I mean, that's why, come to find out, yesterday we showed you that clip of Josh Gordon, who has been suspended by the NFL under his substance abuse policy in the last week, formerly now of the Patriots and had been on the Seattle roster. And we've heard a lot about his demons. Well, come to find out, those demons, part of it was demons at Baylor. Josh Gordon revealing that Baylor coaches, when he was at Baylor, were helping him beat drug tests. Specifically, they had a system set up, and he explained it. And I put a video out. I understand that was a long time ago. I understand the administration that was there. And I do mean administration at Baylor. Everybody's gone, right? But how is that not a bigger story? How are people not talking about that? And so when I say I agree with Emmert, and I'm not saying writers aren't going to follow up maybe on that story, but Josh Gordon is in the throes of the situation right now in the NFL, very high profile guy at the moment. We didn't know why the Patriots cut him. I think we know now why the Patriots cut him. And where does it emanate from? Partly Baylor. And of course, Gordon talked about being enabled as a youngster before he got to college. And we all know that's true. We all know that situation. It's really unfortunate because we've got to look in the mirror as a society to demonize a Josh Gordon, right? To say that these things exist and they're happening and they contribute to Josh Gordon's situation and condition right now is not to abscond him from responsibility. Absolutely not. It isn't. But that's what people will say. Oh, it's okay for him to do this. He's not an adult. He's not responsible for his own actions. Right. That's what you get. So this all plays into the whole idea with Emmert, of all people, by the way. They had a conference up in Aspen, and they had a conference up in Aspen yesterday, of all places. Aspen, right? It's like $3,000 hotel rooms. And it involved Emmert. It involved Ramogi Huma, who is the leader of the NCPA, that is a prospective union for the players in college sports. And he's been around a long time. Good guy, right? Gets along with people. So you had several eminent college football figures. And actually, Mark Walker was there, who is the congressman who has been working on a bill in Washington, a federal bill that would allow for compensation of players by third-party companies, right, in college, benefiting from their name, image, likeness. Mark Walker who is, I believe, a congressman from North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. We've covered that story. So they were all together, but Emmert actually got his own segment of this conference by himself. Nobody else was around. Everybody else is all together except for him. Not a surprise. Now let's bring in Tim Brando, the mayor of Shreveport, keys to the city, freshly minted inductee into the Louisiana Sports Hall of Fame. Got to congratulate him on that from the outset. Congratulations. That's awesome news.
Thank you, Brooks. It is really humbling because it's an inaugural award, an ambassador's award, which they've never given out before. And I had, you reached a certain time in your life where these kinds of things start happening, and you're sort of like pump the brakes because I'm not a finished work yet.
Right.
I'm okay with last year. It was the Lombardi Honors and the Italian American Hall of Fame, and that was great. But Louisiana Sports Hall of Fame, and going in with, of all people, Nick Saban, who coached obviously at LSU, and a lot of other dear friends of mine, including the Sports Information Director Emeritus, who got the Distinguished Journalism Award, Kent Lowe, who's one of the most wonderful people I know. We grew up together, we dreamed together, and he's going in simultaneously with me. And there are many, many others, but they have a Dave Dixon Award named after the man that brought the USFL into form back in the day, and it was just he had a lot to do with the Superdome being built, along with the former governor John McKithen. And I thought when it happened it might be one of those awards, but they actually created one, and they're not going to give it out annually. They're going to give it out when they feel it's warranted, with the thought process being someone from Louisiana that has promoted the state on a national level, brought back positive vibes to his or her home state. And because it's not going to be given out annually, and I'm the inaugural recipient, it really does, impact me in a way that I did not anticipate that it would. And I'm actually very, very excited about it. So thank you for that. And there's an old saying that the last to take hold of your success may be the ones closest or nearest you. And
right.
There's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that. And for that reason alone, I'm ecstatic. So thank you.
Man, it's amazing, though, because I've studied football history, sports history. The history that you have in the state of Louisiana when it comes to sports, there's no better state. I mean, you've got the bigger states, you got a lot going on, but you go back to Tulane Stadium and how far in front, Tulane Stadium and the Sugar Bowl outside of the Rose Bowl, that was the destination for football for half a century. And then the innovation into the Superdome, which I don't think people really bring up enough, is still the standard bearer for this new kind of facility. It's amazing. And there's so many characters. There's so many people. It's such a great place. And so, and they hear this ambassador thing. I mean, and to me, what makes it that much more heartening is, number one, you're going stronger than you've ever gone. I mean, you are out there in the vanguard of college football, college basketball, and what you do, and doing it in public and working your ass off big time. But also, you're someone with a conscience, and there's not enough people out there like you that are holding I mean, think about it, Tim. Of all people to get this honor and award, it really speaks to merit, because you're one of the very few, if not the only broadcaster out there who's holding the establishment accountable, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good sign.
Maybe. I do believe, and I learned this from a lot of the guys that preceded me, people that I looked up to, Keith Jackson, Kurt Gowdy, so many others that were broadcasting icons. And they said, if you're going to make a difference, make sure you say something memorable. And what that meant was, when you're doing a game, it's basically the facts. It's where's the ball, who's carrying the ball, who tipped the ball, who tackled the player that had the ball, who recovered the ball once it was fumbled when the tackle took, all those things. Those are the fundamentals of broadcasting a game. But if you really are passionate about the game, you see it not just through that sort of bubble of what I'm doing, and that all that matters is what you're doing at that given time, but the vast landscape. You know, great offensive coordinators paint the width and breadth of the field. That's how you do it. Well, as a broadcaster, if you're going to make a difference, you need to talk about, especially if you're passionate about the sport, how can we make it better? What needs to be done to rid ourselves of whatever the fundamental flaws with the sport might be? How do you get the naysayers to understand that they are in fact wrong and not accurate? To remove the veil of impropriety in any way you possibly can. And if you ruffle some feathers along the way, so be it, because you've got to be honest with yourself and you want to say something that resonates, that people understand. Otherwise, you're just a time and temperature voice in an elevator. It's not, you're not making an impact. So those guys and the great Beano Cook used to tell me, hey, stay on your toes. And by the way, he used to say, if you're going to be critical, be willing to say you were wrong when you were wrong. Okay?
Right.
And,
yeah.
And if your network screws up, you got to be as tough on your network as you are any other network. And if you're not honest in that regard, then you're just going to be looking like a sycophant guy that's waving pom-poms for whoever it is you're working for at the time. And I do think that there's a lot of that going around with regard to college football now. I think that's the way fans view some of the way the presentation is coming to them in their homes. Now, listen, the audience is also different, okay? They are seeing the game through their own biased eyes. Everyone charges everyone with bias, but those that are home are viewing.
But they take their cues. They
Yes,
take
they
their
do.
cues from
Yes,
the
they do.
broadcasters and the networks. To
Yes,
me,
they
the
do.
audience does.
There's no doubt about that. And I've had the good fortune of being born in a place where college football and college athletics in general was religion. But I have worked, and especially now with Fox, that's one of the great things about being at Fox, is I'm going into places that for, at least a generation I didn't get to visit. I'd never been to the Big House or to Camp Randall. I'm getting to go to those places now. Rose Bowl, Autzen and Eugene and Salt Lake City, Utah. These are places that I had not been in 25, 30 years. So I'd like to think that I'm much more well-rounded now than I was 20 years ago when I was just covering the SEC on CBS. I always tried to follow every aspect of college football, even though I was primarily covering the SEC. And the audience does change. There's no denying that. I mean, even in my hometown, Brooks, I'll tell you, I can walk to the store during Christmas and someone will say to me, Tim, how are you? We haven't seen you in so long. And did you retire? Because they're watching SEC football.
Yeah,
watching
right. They got Paul. But you're on with Paul too. What the hell? What are you watching?
Yeah, they think Feinbaum is, helping me hold on to my career. Whatever career I have left, because they haven't seen me call a game, and
he's that crank.
Since I left CBS, they haven't seen me call a game. So that's the nature of the beast. That's the nature of what we do, and viewers now are living much more so now than ever in this myopic world of only what their local or regional politics may be, and they don't venture outside that area. All of us in the media, we're I know how you probably are. You're going to wherever the best game is. You've got your remote control, and you probably know what game is on 6 different channels at the same time. But that's not the way most people view their college sports. So to answer your question, that's the point, is that if you're gonna make an impact, you're not going to hit everybody's home unless you're doing the Super Bowl or unless you're doing the college football playoff national championship game. Your audience is going to be somewhere between 2 million to 4 million of fans that are in the local and or regional area of your broadcast coverage. And if you're going to impact the audience outside that area, you're going to do it on other platforms or by saying something in a game that is so memorable, other people pick it up and they run with it. And That's kind of what's happened with me. And I've told you this. I don't think I've ever been in a better place than I am now at Fox.
Yeah. It's amazing to hear you talk about you got a chance to go to all these new places, and it just gives you a reaffirmation of how embedded, particularly college football, is around the whole country. There's this perception it's regional, it's southerner, it's this and that. It isn't. It isn't. It's in Boise, it's in Minneapolis, it's everywhere, and I think it really underlines some of the things that you're talking about, the audience and what the perception is. I think another problem and an issue is everything is current. Everything is right now. Well, wait a minute. You're telling me about the rivalries. You're telling me about the legends. You're telling, but the networks really aren't acting upon that. And let me give you an example of what I mean. And boy, it's serendipity that you're here today, because Hayden Fry has recently, God rest his soul, just passed away. And Hayden Fry, and I was watching a lot of the Iowa coverage, great coverage. They're all over it, the story, and remembering him as they should. But he's a legend. Rose turned the program around, but not mentioning to me his number one contribution, which is Jerry Levias,
SMU,
and opening things up for African Americans. And needless to say, that was a huge deal. And I think having someone like you, and I know Spencer is definitely in that category, and there's other people, but to me, that's really another part of what we're talking about here. Talk a little bit about Hayden Fry and what your experience was with him and what you know about the Jerry Levias situation.
I grew up on watching all these coaches shows back in the 60s. I was broadcasting with my dad's help, his local TV shows, and playing the drums and singing with his band when I was
that's awesome.
6 years old. So, but I knew I wanted to be a sportscaster, and by age 9 or 10, which would have been 1965 or 6, I was already 3 or 4 years into, Chris Schenkel, Bud Wilkinson. I knew who all the broadcasters were on college football games.
Lindsey Nelson,
and the Cotton Bowl, and people forget this, but Lee Grosscup, the Cupper, who did the Utah pass, the first jump pass, worked with Al Michaels as the number 2 team behind Keith Jackson and Frank Broyles in the late 60s and early 70s. These were people that I was watching, and I'm also watching the coaches shows. And in those days, when we didn't have cable TV, a great way to consume your college football was either by watching, and a lot of your fans will relate to this, Lindsey Nelson doing the Notre Dame replays on Sunday.
That was my house. That was my family.
Ray Scott did the Penn State replays with Joe Paterno.
Really?
Also on Sunday mornings. Right.
I didn't know that.
Even the great Eddie Robinson had his games rebroadcast, and they would play a school like Howard at Yankee Stadium.
Right. Well, they had great teams,
and
they had great teams.
The HBCUs were being represented by Grambling against whoever they were playing, and they run these re-airs on Sunday mornings. Well, Sunday nights, especially in my part of the world, growing up in Shreveport, Northwest Louisiana, which is on literally, if I drive 60 miles to the west, I'm in Longview, Texas, East Texas. All right. If I drive 60 miles to the north, I'm in Hope, Arkansas. So we're in Frank Broyles country, with the great Bud Campbell, who was the broadcaster for ABC that did regional games in the Southwest Conference. We also got the Gene Stallings show, because Texas A&M has a huge alumni backing in Louisiana, in this part of Shreveport. So we had the Gene Stallings show. We had the Darrell Royal show for Texas. We had the Charlie Mack show with Walter Hill and John Ferguson as your host for Coach McClendon.
Right.
We had the Bear Bryant show with the Lay's, excuse me, what was the potato chip? Somebody in Alabama is going to kill me for this. But anyway, there was a potato chip company that was the sponsor of it, and the old sports information director at Arkansas State, later became the athletic director, was the host of that show with Coach Bryant. But also we had the Hayden Fry show, because SMU is in Dallas. And of course, in Louisiana, in Shreveport, there's a huge SMU alumni base, because it's the big school in the Metroplex. And Shreveport's an old oil and gas town that sort of saw itself as a Dallas wannabe metropolitan area. So we got all of these shows. Okay. And I could not wait to watch Hayden Fry because he was so charismatic. I mean, in 1967, I'm 11 years old and I'm watching Hayden Fry and I'm like, God, I got to meet this guy. He was so charismatic. Most coaches' shows were a colossal bore. Now, Bear Bryant's on occasion was really good because he would tape his in the middle of the night after the game. And Charlie Thornton was the host of his show. It just came to me. Charlie Thornton was the host of his show.
You're doing a book. You told me you're doing a book, aren't you?
And,
you better be.
And Johnny Musso was playing, and that was Bear's favorite player. And I'll never forget this. One night, one of Bear's great wingbacks in his triple option in the wishbone is running this play, and Bear wanted to give Johnny Musso credit for every great running play there was. And I forget the name of the gentleman that was running the ball, but he was an African-American. Okay. One of the very first African-American players. And so he's running with the football, and Bear says to Charlie, there goes old Johnny Musso right there. Old Johnny, he's got a wonderful family, Johnny Musso. And Charlie's quick to point out, no, that's Coach, that's not Johnny. That's we'll go with Wiley, or we'll just his name. No, Coach, that's Wiley. He says, yeah, but you see that block by Johnny Musso? That was a hell of a block by Johnny.
Wow.
Anyway, those shows were fun to
Golden
watch.
Flake, by the way. It's Golden Flake.
Golden Flake, thank you. Yes. Anyway, well, you got an audience. We know that now, right?
Right. That's true. Yeah, I'm hearing from everybody on that.
So Charlie Thornton's doing it, and but SMU's show was also incredibly good, and I'm not sure if the host was Vern or if it was Frank Gleber. It was might have been Bill Mercer, another great broadcaster from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But anyway, Jerry Levias, number 23, playing on that team. And because he was the first African-American at SMU, and I think one of the first in the entire Southwest Conference, maybe the first in the Southwest
He was
Conference.
the second, but the first on scholarship.
Okay,
The first on scholarship, and the
Anyway,
second by like a week.
Right. And so when you're watching the game, if you're a baseball fan and you can recall going to a game at Yankee Stadium and never taking your eyes off Mickey Mantle, or going to a game at Candlestick Park and for whatever reason you couldn't take your eyes off number 24 in center field, the Say Hey Kid. Willie Mays was just a player you could not. Well, there were 9 players on the field, and your eyes are fixated on Willie in center, and he may not even get a ball hit to him, but you couldn't take your eyes off of him. Jerry Levias was that player.
Yep.
For SMU, and he was getting the ball a lot. And every time he touched it, something dynamic happened.
He was a revolutionary player.
Oh my God, in every way imaginable. And he took on all the same issues that Jackie Robinson had 2 decades earlier. He did. But he remained so classy. And I've seen him in recent years.
He's still around.
TCU SMU games. And Spencer changed his name to show you the impact he had on Spencer, who I believe just turned 55. I want to say I'm 8, almost 9 years older than Spencer. But when he was picked up by the 49ers as a free agent and joined them and became their special teams captain for the 1990 Super Bowl, Spencer changed his number from what he wore in Houston to number 23. 23 was available, and he changed it because of Jerry Levias. And it meant everything to him. So years later, when I became a broadcaster at ESPN in the mid-'80s, 1985 was that year with Chuck Long and the team that won the Big Ten. They beat Michigan at home, but they lost at Ohio State. But then Ohio State lost to Wisconsin, enabling Iowa to go to the Rose Bowl and play UCLA. They lost the game, but it meant so much to Iowa to get back to the Rose Bowl. They had been there 5 years earlier. And Chuck Long came back for another year. He could have come out early after his junior year, but he came back solely to get back to the Rose Bowl. That particular year was my first year of doing games at ESPN. We had not started game day yet, but that was my first year. And getting to meet him and cover him as a young reporter was such a thrill. He's already
amazing.
I knew about his past at SMU because I was such a student of the game as a kid and, in my adolescence. And Hayden would joke about, you can't be just 29, Tim. You've got to be like 49, and he appreciated my love of the history of the game. And, or as Bino used to say, just because it happened before you were born doesn't make it any less significant, And if you knew a little something about what had happened in the generations before you were in the business, it meant a lot to coaches. And when we started game day and we moved further into it, I got to know him a lot better. I mean, he had this cool look about him with the wavy hair and the white pants. And he knew at Iowa, he needed to bring some swag to that program. It was in the Midwest. They were struggling with the economy, and he wanted to make it cool to be an Iowa Hawkeye. And fighting the Michigans and the Ohio States, you had to do that. And for a period of almost 10 years, Iowa won more Big Ten football games than any of those teams. Yeah. And he did all of that. And it's a shame he didn't win it all one year, but he got awfully close. And to be that close at a school like Iowa for as long as Iowa was huge. And as a kid, I would tell him, I'm driving down and I'm listening to Hawkeyes games on WHO in Des Moines, which it was a huge 50,000 watt station, which along with WWL in New Orleans, which carried LSU games well into the Saturday night, that when the LSU game would end and you were driving late at night, you would turn it right from WWL over to WHO and you'd get the replay of the Iowa game earlier that day. And, I talked up to him about things like that, and he loved it. And I never felt like he was, it's like Bobby Bowden. I never felt like he was that much older than me. He was such a hip guy.
Dynamic
person, and hip, right. And that's one of the reasons why he lasted as long as he did, and he had the impact that he had. Those are the two coaches from that generation to me, Brooks, that were way ahead of the other guys their age. Bobby Bowden coming from West Virginia to Florida State and creating that program, very similar to what Hayden did when he got to Iowa and really brought it back from the dead.
You are an inspiration talking to you, for me personally, hearing this, to get like a podcast, long form podcast, Tim. And I wish we had more time right now. We don't, but we got to have you come back and talk what's going on. I want to get your thoughts on everything that's going on right now.
Sure.
This has been phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Well, listen, we got,
awesome.
I'm home. As it turns out, we're about to have a new grandbaby.
Congratulations.
Monday,
oh, wow. Awesome.
And I had to pull out of a basketball game at Fox on Saturday that we had at Providence because my wife has to have some surgery. She'll be okay, but she's got to have it. But I'm home now until the 30th. So, after Christmas and before New Year's, let's try this again.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Tim.
Okay, Brooks. All the best.
That's Hall of Famer Tim Brando, Louisiana Sports Hall of Famer, and joining us from Shreveport, as always, the best. And, I think the Hayden Fry thing is really a metaphor for the way things should be. We should know more about the past. And I think we knew about Jerry Levias. The thing about Jerry Levias, the first African-American in the Southwest Conference on scholarship, the guy who was first overall was actually a walk-on named John Westbrook. He's a great story. He went to Baylor and was a very good player and had an incredible experience himself. But if we knew about these things, when Hayden Fry passes, sure, the Rose Bowls and Iowa and winning and all that stuff, that's great. There's a lot of coaches that have done that. But there's zero coaches who recruited the first African-American into the Southwest Conference. And, of course, Jerry Levias is on that stage, front and center, and then you've got Hayden Fry behind him. Another example of what I'm talking about is Lee Corso. Lee Corso was the first coach to recruit an African-American into the ACC, right? Lee's on every day. Lee's been around a long time. Hopefully he'll stay on, right? But how many people watching know that he was the coach that recruited an African-American to Maryland, very first African-American to play, not only in the ACC, but in the South, 1963, right? That's not too bad. It's not a shame. That's a disgrace. That should be part of his identity, his legacy. These men, right? They're obviously not the heroes, but at the very least, they did something, right? And in the case of Jerry Levias, what to me makes it all the more important to have the conversation is Jerry Levias. If you go and look at his highlights, Google him, go on YouTube. Well, we showed some of his highlights, but not really. That short little clip that we showed earlier. Jerry Levias was a revelation in college football. He was Reggie Bush. It's a very similar player every time he touched the ball. And he took a program at SMU that was down and out, and Fry was about to be fired, and he saved Fry's job, turned the program around single-handedly. Meantime, he's playing under death threats. He had a death threat his last game against TCU. At TCU, SMU, TCU, that's their big rivalry game. And it turns out in that game, they had asked Jerry Levias to, I can't remember if it's because the Dallas police were so concerned and the Fort Worth police were so concerned, they had like 2 or 3 dozen people. Oh, this is what it was. So Jerry Levias, first African-American ever to play in the Southwest Conference, is playing his last year. He's been there 4 years now. And they're playing TCU, right? And there's a death threat called in, and the local police have taken it so seriously that they have like a SWAT team at the stadium. And so Jerry Levias does not go out for warm-ups. Hayden Fry, same guy, tells him, don't go out for warm-ups, and doesn't tell him why. Well, Hayden Fry knows about the death threats. Levias didn't know. He didn't know until after the game, right? And the other thing was, it comes out later, Levias has told this story, and Jerry Levias is very much alive and well, lives in Houston, I believe it is now. And we may have to get Spencer Tillman on to talk about him, because I know they're friends. And as Tim mentioned, Spencer Tillman, who played for the Niners, won Super Bowl rings, great player with Oklahoma, changed his number to 23 in honor of Jerry Levias, right? So Levias was also told to make sure he was in that huddle, as far in as he could be, for the SMU football team for that last game. And man, there's some amazing stories with him, his life story, but what happened on the field to him, things that happened in the Texas A&M. Oh, it was actually the TCU game, I think. That last game, Jerry Levias had been in a situation where he was in a pileup, and he had someone on the TCU squad spit in his face during the pileup. And he was so angry that he went off to the sidelines, and you can see this on the game film, and he threw his helmet off. And that was it. After 4 years, he's still dealing with this. He's got the death threat that he didn't know about at the time. And then he has, a situation where they're spitting in his face still. That had gone on his whole career. And so he leaves the field, and he's going to stop playing that day. Then he comes back, and his first play back returns a punt for a touchdown. Now let's go out and talk to Jemele Hill. You know Jemele Hill. Of course, everybody knows Jemele Hill. She's everywhere. Formerly ESPN, now at The Atlantic, has her own podcast on Spotify, updated twice a week. That's a lot of work. Jemele Hill is going to be joining us here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. I can't think of a better person to have on today to talk about what's going on. Current events. Colin Kaepernick. Want to talk to her about Colin Kaepernick. Also, she's Michigan State. Mark D'Antonio. What's going on there? How does that guy, what's happening? Michigan State football. Come on. I know the guy's done a nice job. But so we're going to be visiting with Jemele Hill here in a second. And but she is at the forefront of this Colin Kaepernick coverage, and an extremely important voice. And I couldn't be happier that she's at The Atlantic now, because I think that transcends sports media. I've done research over the last 5 years, football history. And when you find out what's really going on, you find out from the Atlantic in 1940 or 1980. That's where you find out what's really going on. So I'm glad that she has moved to this non-sports outlet where she can write about sports and she can tell the truth and talk to us. And she was already doing that in sports media, of course, but now do it where she can really zero in on that stuff. It's a great service to all of us who follow sports, particularly right now, at least when it comes to Colin Kaepernick. And of course, she was herself part of that whole story, as everybody knows. So there's no more valuable voice that you could have in this context of the Colin Kaepernick situation than Jemele Hill. Jemele Hill will be part of doctoral dissertations that are written about Colin Kaepernick in 20 years, 10 years, 50 years, right? And of course, we had Stephen A. Smith last week acknowledge, and we talked about it on this show. We played the video. Did anybody else? No, we were the only ones. Wait a minute. Stephen A. Smith on this other show, not on ESPN. Stephen A. Smith is telling us he set the workout up for Kaepernick. And why is he so upset that it didn't go off the way he had hoped? Well, maybe because he thought it made him look bad with the NFL. I mean, there's a lot of things going on there on the air. You're not really sure why they're happening on First Take. Well, we know. And thankfully, Jemele helped to point it out, helped to contextualize it for us. So we're going to be visiting with her straight away. And we're going to be talking a lot of college football tomorrow, specifically in the aftermath of signing day. Dave Refson of Big Ten Network, Peter Burns of SEC Network, heavy hitters. They're going to be coming on to talk about what happened in the SEC Big Ten, along with some other folks. As always, we're with you every weekday, Monday through Friday. And we're going to give you that NFL stuff, which we always do. Phil Perry was great today from NBC Sports Boston. We're also going to be visiting, I just got word, Barrett Sallee of CBS will be with us as well, as he's a guy who can definitely canvass college football, what's happening there. But I'm most interested in what's happening right now with what Jemele Hill is doing, what she's doing with her career, because I think that she's at the vanguard of what sports journalism should be. She's more than a sports journalist, and we're finding that out now, right? But no one has done a better job in managing their career and ascending in their career than she has under the circumstances. And nobody knows better, the perils of ESPN than I do, having dealt with that for so many years. So many things that people don't know about how things really work. And so to me personally, it's really an inspiration what she's able to do. And now she's better known now than she was when she was on ESPN. She is. She's known to more people and has more influence and more impact in what she's doing. It's phenomenal. If you've ever followed Jemele on Twitter, unbelievable, the outpouring of people. What does that tell you about what she's doing? The instantaneous tens of thousands of people to whatever it is she's saying. It speaks to the legitimacy of what she's doing, the merit to what she's doing. And that's the way it's always been. And I think it took her detaching herself from the mainstream sports media and moving into the main media for at least me to really see it for what it is and the genius of what she does. It's the freaking truth. And that's why I really want to talk to her, particularly about Colin Kaepernick, because I've got thoughts where you contemplate different opinions about that situation, about Kaepernick himself, that I'm interested in getting her perspective on. So we'll do that shortly. And And we've also got some other stuff that we're going to be filling you in on. Of course, we talked about the situation with athletes being compensated for their name, image, likeness. Mark Emmert, we showed you the clip from him today. Kind of a smug reaction from Mark Emmert when it comes to being asked about the lack of credibility with the NCAA by an interviewer in Aspen yesterday. He said, well, we're not as bad as journalism. Right, exactly. You're right. It's the first thing I've ever agreed with you on. Jamel, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Thank you for your patience. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem whatsoever.
So the Spotify thing, you're doing that 2 times a week. That's a lot of work.
Well,
it is.
I often joke that I traded one job, the job at ESPN, for 35 different jobs. So
right.
It's a lot of fun. I mean, this is an opportunity for me to exercise a different muscle. I've always thought the podcasting format was like very intimate and lent itself to, doing great interviews. And so I've been really excited about the progress of it, the type of people I've been able to get on and the conversations I've had.
What's your approach now? Because, of course, people know you from the sports, but how much focus are you going to continue on the sports and how much are you not going to focus on the sports as you go forward?
Sports will always be a part of my life. It was, sports writing was why I got into this business, and that's why it was important for me to align with The Atlantic, because they were going to allow me to write about sports in the way that I felt like was important and impactful, especially in this climate. So it's going to always be a piece of what I do, but I guess kind of the upside to the controversy of 2017 is that I'm not really seen now as strictly a sports person. Now, I've always had these other interests in terms of politics and pop culture, but I think now, because of the credibility I've been able to gain as a journalist, that people don't hold me to sometimes some of the same boundaries that they do other people who come from the sports world. So I've been very fortunate in that sense.
So what did you think of the way the Kaepernick thing played out in Atlanta?
I would say, I guess the best way that I can put it is that it was just, to me, an indication of what this has been all along. Look, I've been saying for probably about 2.5 years that Colin Kaepernick would never play in the NFL again. And I knew that the moment that Donald Trump said his name at a rally, once he was elected, that was the end, because there was no way this group of owners were ever going to go against the president. And Donald Trump was the one who essentially put in the code red on Colin Kaepernick, which I think had a great deal to do with why he was able to, I wouldn't say necessarily win his grievance, because I know that's not the legal term, but why the NFL settled with him, because it was just way too many receipts. Donald Trump, it was in Jerry Jones's deposition. He told Jerry Jones that Colin Kaepernick was a winning issue for him, and he would not let up if they let him back into the league. So considering how the NFL was very scared and very worried about those type of headlines and how they felt like it put their sport in a divisive place, of course they were never going to let him back in. And that tryout was just a sham. And I know that there have been people who have been critical of Colin Kaepernick, saying, well, when he went to the workout, despite knowing he wasn't going to get a fair chance, he should have done it differently. Well, think about this. I mean, for 2.5+ years since his last down as a professional football player, he has kept himself in incredible shape. He has maintained his lifestyle as if any moment an NFL team would call. And so that hasn't happened in 3 years. Offensive coordinators and coaches and GMs, they didn't lose his number. They know exactly what kind of shape that he's in. So I don't know why people thought that somehow this was going to turn out any differently than the last 3 years have. So for me, it was just kind of hard to see him subjected to that by the NFL, and for other people to believe that he somehow doesn't want it enough. He didn't want it enough. The moment that an NFL career didn't become apparent, he would have gained 20 pounds and started eating McDonald's every day. But that wasn't how he carried himself. He carried himself
like Trump.
He carried himself.
Eating McDonald's.
Exactly. He carried himself like somebody who felt like that they knew that if the moment they called him and he wasn't ready, he knew what the criticism would be. So he stayed ready. And I think now it's very apparent. Roger Goodell said it himself. They have, quote unquote, moved on. And my guess is Colin Kaepernick is probably doing the same.
Yeah. The first thing you talked about as it pertains to Kaepernick is something I've been hammering on and has been completely left out by sports media, at least, and that is Donald Trump. And I can't tell you how many people have come on the show, and it's not like I'm putting them on the spot. I'm just asking, why is Eric Reed kneeling, protesting, assertive on Twitter, going to the workout in Atlanta, and he's gainfully employed? Kenny Stills, somewhat similar, right? Why? Because Donald Trump probably doesn't even know who they are. And that's the issue. Why don't you think more people in sports media focus on that? Because nothing could be more obvious.
Well, I mean, some of it depends on which sports media and where in sports media we're talking about.
Right.
And I think it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people in sports media to openly criticize the president, because that does come, as I know personally, that comes with a lot. All right. And so the truth of the matter is that, once Donald Trump understood that Colin Kaepernick was the polarizing figure, not to mention he was the one who started all this, and he's a quarterback, given the fact that he became the face of this particular issue, then I think it just made all the sense in the world for him to use him as a piñata. And he saw how his following, and even those who don't consider themselves to be necessarily Donald Trump supporters, but will look at this issue and say, hey, I agree with him on this. He finally found something that, frankly, a lot of people universally supported. I mean, of course, Colin Kaepernick has his supporters, but, there's been a lot of polls and different things that have showed that the majority of people did not agree that Colin Kaepernick should have ever taken a knee. So knowing that this is a majority issue for him, and he hasn't had a lot of those in his presidency. He hasn't had a lot of wins, period, that are universally beloved. And he found one, which is why he was never going to let it go. And the NFL owners knew that. And I think to a large degree, they blamed Colin Kaepernick for a lot of the turmoil and conversation and controversy that they were in for a good 2 years. And so, no, Eric Reed does not mean as much. He's not the symbol of this movement. And that's why Eric Reed is back in the NFL. And even that was hard for him, because we forget that he went a long time. And the Panthers were kind of in a desperate situation. But it's much easier to allow Eric Reed back into the NFL or to ignore Kenny Stills. And this is not to disrespect what those two have done on the social justice front, but it's easier because they weren't the ones who started it.
Now, I may be wrong about this, but a question in the back of my mind is, over the last 3 years, why has Colin Kaepernick not been more active out in the public sphere? When it comes to civil rights or police brutality, why don't we see him doing events or whatever it may be, right? That's in the back of my mind. Now, when I think about that, I think to myself, well, if he's doing that, the NFL owners are more likely to not sign him. That perhaps could be the case. But what's your response to someone who would say, where is Kaepernick? We see him do a commercial once in a while, but where has he been for 3 years?
Well, I mean, you can see easily when you follow him on social media. I mean, he started the Know Your Rights campaign. He's been
that's why I'm asking, because I'm ignorant of it.
He started the Know Your Rights campaign, which is a campaign where he goes around to young people of color. He helps them understand what their rights are when it comes to the police and the legal system. He has given away clothes to convicted felons who are trying to re-enter society and reintegrate. He has done so much charitable work. He does it on a daily basis. And he gave $1 million of his own money for social justice causes. He raised another few million through some of other athletes and celebrity friends he knows. So he has raised a ton of money, and not to mention all the jersey sales, because with the controversy, what interesting thing happened is that his jersey sales, he was at one point, he was in the top 5 of NFL jersey sales, even though he wasn't playing. He donated all of that money to various social justice causes. So when the people, that's why, that's why I kind of took, I don't want to say offense, that's not the right word, but I thought it was a little misconstrued or misinformed of, say, Jay-Z to say that they needed action, that, sort of moving past the protest. Colin Kaepernick has been moved past the protest. He's been out there on the front lines doing things constantly on a consistent basis. It's not his fault that people only pay attention when it's a big headline on CNN or when it's on ESPN or something that's a little juicier to pay attention to. But if you go to his Instagram feed, you will see a regular and routine basis. This man is in the community all the time.
Fascinating how, and it's my bad. I should know that, first of all. But where's the media? Where's all the people that can't wait to jump on the guy, right?
Well,
Go ahead.
That's what I was going to say. Some of the arguments that have been that, oh, he only did this to make it about himself and all these other things. When, I mean, if he wanted to make it about himself, he could have very easily picked up a microphone or talked to a reporter at any point. But he has given very few interviews and nothing on a wide scale basis. And he explained in detail when he was in San Francisco why these issues and these causes were important to him. He began to speak about them before he started kneeling, which a lot of people also don't realize. And so I just think that because the noise around him has been about patriotism and the flag, that's why a lot of people are unaware of what he's been doing on a consistent basis to put his gesture with his actions.
Yeah, it's tragic in so many different ways. Visiting with Jemele Hill, of course. And so what do you think about when you hear Jimmy Pitaro talk about, we've got the data, fans don't want politics with their sports? I mean, what's going through your mind when you hear the guy running ESPN saying that?
Well, I would be really curious as to how that's being framed, because politics and sports have always mixed, as we all know. And the thing is, I think most sports fans, or I would say whenever you're in the media and you're serving the public, you're going to have to give them a percentage of things that they want, a percentage of things that they're interested in, and a percentage of things that they don't know they're interested in, but they need to be interested in. That's kind of your job as the media. And I've always thought, even when I was there, and I was very public about this, both I was public about this and I said it inside the building 5 million times, is I thought that ESPN capitulated to a false narrative. And that false narrative being that the network was too political, that it was too left-leaning, and all these other things, which were noise and narratives created by people outside of ESPN who frankly wanted to use ESPN to make themselves more famous, or because it's low-hanging fruit. And of course, when you talk about the most dominant sports media entity in our industry, it's going to get you a little bit of celebrity and a lot of positioning, if you will. And it was never true. And I know that this sounds crazy coming from somebody they're very deeply delved into political waters. But as I told people, it's like, I never did it on SportsCenter. I didn't do it on ESPN airwaves. This happened on social media, my comments about the president. And whenever I was at ESPN and we covered stories that dealt with sports and politics and that messy mixture, it was always within the vein of what was in the news. Colin Kaepernick, whether you like it or not, is one of the most significant sports stories of the last decade, period. And you would be journalistically irresponsible if you didn't talk about it.
Which we are, by the way, which everybody is in sports media. You know, that's the way it is.
That's the way it is. And I think there's a lot of fans and I understand this part of it, because of the climate in our country. We're hearing about politics so much. We are saturated that they look at sports as a quote unquote escape. Well, it can be that, and that's part of it. But if you're going to take the games and the live events and the personalities, you have to understand that the people that are being covered in sports media, the athletes, that they're more than just that. You know, LeBron James and Greg Popovich and Steve Kerr and Steph Curry, they are fully whole human beings who live in this country, and they're going to have views. And as always, people pick and choose what they consider to be, politics. I mean, everybody knows that the their military alliance is based off money. It is not based off because the NFL just decided, hey, we love the troops. They are paid by the Department of Defense to do certain military things during the games. And that's what it is. I mean, players weren't even coming out on the field for the national anthem before like 2005 and 2006, and nobody cared. The fact that we have a national anthem and military flyovers, there's your sports and politics every single game. When arenas and stadiums are put up, they come to taxpayers. it's voted on. There's your sports and politics. So
right.
I understand that people, want to not think for a couple hours. Well, I'm sorry, that's just not realistic. Okay.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's great talking to you about these issues as it pertains to Kaepernick. I've noticed, though, you've also been writing a little bit about college sports and the injustice perpetrated. I think it's probably the biggest institutional injustice and vestige of the past that exists in our country, and that is stealing billions of dollars from labor in college sports, college football, and college basketball. What do you think about this new development where we now have legislatures like California all of a sudden sticking up for athletes, it seems, in trying to help them get compensated?
Well, I think that's the only way that anything was ever going to change. They were going to have to force the NCAA's hand. I had Cory Booker on the podcast, and he said it perfectly. He said the NCAA was never going to correct itself. And he is one of those legislators who is pushing in New Jersey a very similar bill, like you pointed out, in California, as are, a dozen other or so states. They understand that if they don't take up this fight, the NCAA has no interest in sharing any part of this money. And really, this is one of those empires, as in the NCAA, that is just destined to fail under this model. I mean, I heard what Mark Emmert has said, and I think he's being very oblivious. We also have to understand the roots of college sports were built in amateurism. It was never built with the intention that this would one day become $1 billion industry and it would generate this kind of money, for coaches, for universities. It never was expected to happen. And so
it's so brilliant. Look at the college football playoff they've taken, or look at football. They've taken the NCAA logo literally off it all.
Yeah.
So they're not even pretending anymore.
No, they're not. And I think that this is going to be an empire that we will see fall in my lifetime, our lifetime, for sure, because I think the athletes are getting much smarter. And the fact that this is a charge in part that's being led by LeBron James is particularly interesting to me, because knowing how forward thinking LeBron is, he's thinking about his son. And there is no way that he wants his son to be exploited, because his son is, look at the headlines and the publicity and the money he's generating now. And he's a
endorsements.
Right. He wants his son to be able.
I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah. He wants his son to be able to reap the benefit from this. And I think that that's very smart and forward thinking. And when you have professional athletes like him educating younger players about what they're worth, eventually it is only a matter of time before the labor decides to fight back in a stronger way than they are now. It started with Ed O'Bannon. He did it. And I think you're going to see more and more athletes do it. And look at the NBA, they're going to be abandoning this one and done rule, because I think, one, it's not a good rule. It doesn't make any sense. And two, I think players are totally comfortable working outside of the NCAA to become professional. So either they get on board or they're going to get rolled right over and become extinct. It's really that simple.
Visiting with Jemele Hill, when you look at why players aren't compensated, the situation that they're in, this is my thought. The bottom line is, in this country, when you look at history, including in history in football, it's the media. The media created football. They create the importance and the context of all of these things. And part of, I think, the problem that we have, and I think a microcosm of that might be, it might not be, Stephen A. Smith, the amount of money that he is making as motivation in what he's doing on the air. When I see him say, not on ESPN, somewhere else, hey, you know what? I helped set up that workout. Well, your job is to go on the air and talk about you, yourself, and your opinions all day, every day. You didn't tell us that. And then you went nuts afterwards. Who's talking here? And so when you're trying to affect change, when you see injustice, to me, the media is the outlet that has the hammer to affect change. What was your thought about, I know I'm filibustering here, but what was your thought about Stephen A. and that revelation?
Well, at least from what I'm told, and I can't profess to watch a show on a regular enough basis to know this, to have seen this myself, but I'm told that he actually had said this a couple times, that he said it on his radio show. And I think he may have even said it on First Take, that he was having an active involvement in getting Colin Kaepernick a workout. Let me just say first off, too, because I think people some people may know or may not know, but I obviously had a tweet about it when I saw the footage from when Stephen A. was on Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson's podcast, All the Smoke. And he talked about how him and Jay-Z were kind of in this group of people, or they were the two ones who helped this workout happen. And I had a reaction on a couple levels. One, we just talked about this a second ago. You just brought up the fact that Jimmy Pitaro, the ESPN president, and it certainly was the message communicated to me when I was there, was that sports and politics, yeah, they'll cover it if it's in the news and that sort of thing. But there was certainly a level of avoidance there, that they were not trying to get messy with certain issues. So here you have your highest paid talent, right, putting himself in the mix of something that